there's one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Great American Story. I'm Ron Hoon, and John Netzel joins us. John, of course, is the creator of The Great American Story. We have such a great time, John, just sitting around talking great stories from history.
Yeah, this is a great little forum we got going on here.
And this time, the story revolves around an American president who gave a speech that people still talk about to this day. You just heard a clip from it right there.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. It's interesting to me that there was plenty of pressure on the president right up to the minute he delivered the speech to not include that line.
Yeah. The story behind this speech is really interesting. The author of the speech, the writer, Peter Robinson, was one of Reagan's speechwriters back in the 80s. And he was tasked with writing this speech for Reagan, who was going to deliver this speech at the Brandenburg Gate on the 750th anniversary of Berlin. So he starts crafting this speech, but I guess I should go back. He had spent some time in Berlin prior to writing this speech and got kind of a glimpse of life in East and West Berlin and spoke with some folks over there about how he should, what their thoughts were on this wall. And he was influenced by them, and that's where the line, tear down this wall, came into play. The speech went through many iterations. There was a lot of pushback on this speech from the State Department, as well as from the National Security Council. People like Colin Powell and Reagan's Secretary of State. They pushed back. They didn't want Reagan to use the term tear down this wall because they thought it would be an affront to Mikhail Gorbachev and that it would create tension there. So there was a lot of pressure on this speechwriter who knew that the Germans felt this way, and quite frankly, Reagan felt this way. But there was a lot of tension that went on with that to get that speech in its final form. And I think it's really interesting because Reagan finally, when he met with Peter Robinson, talking about the speech, actually said, it's a great quote. He said, Peter says, Mr. President, I learned of the advance trip that your speech will be heard not only in West Berlin, but throughout East Germany, depending upon weather conditions. And is there anything you'd like to say to the people on the other side of the Berlin Wall? He says, the president cocked his head and thought, well, there's that passage about tearing down the wall. The wall has to come down, and that's what I'd like to say to them. So Reagan had the final say. And
I think he already knew Gorbachev enough that, they'd already met. And they'd spent time together. I think man to man, he felt like he knew him well enough that he could get away with that line, and it wasn't going to destroy relations between the USSR and the United States. He really felt like this was a new leader for the Soviet Union who really, truly did want peace, and in a way, it might just advance the cause of peace and freedom in the whole Eastern Bloc.
And we talked about the stark differences between the communist East and the free West.
In the last episode.
And Peter commented on that in an article he wrote, the speechwriter. He said, on one side of the wall lay movement, color, modern architecture, crowded sidewalks, and traffic. On the other lay a kind of void. Buildings still exhibited pockmarks from shelling during the war. Cars appeared few and decrepit, and pedestrians were badly dressed. So there was that
Yes.
real contrast there,
Right.
which really, really fascinating when you think about. But that speech, there's no question that was, I think you could make the argument that was one of the defining moments of Reagan's presidency.
Oh, yes. Oh, no doubt about it. And it's interesting because you go back to really 40 years of his absolute conviction that the communist way of life, the Soviet Union, and all it represented was so wrong compared to what we had in the United States.
Yeah.
And he really never changed his tune. I mean, he was only about a year and a half into office, and he was the first American president to be invited to London to speak to a joint session of Parliament. 18 months into office, people are still around the world trying to figure him out. And he talked about the tyranny of totalitarianism. There's a tongue twister for you, John. And he brings up the Berlin Wall even at that point. Now, this is, so 1982, in that time frame, it was years before he'd give the big speech and years before it would fall. But even in that speech to Parliament, he described it as that dreadful gray gash that cut right through the heart of the great city of Berlin.
Yeah.
It's almost like he was building up and building up and building his base of support for what he thought maybe symbolically would be the most effective way to say, look at the kind of life they're putting you people through.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by a wall. If you try to escape, which, by the way, coming up in the next 15-minute segment of the show, we're going to hear from the director of the Berlin Wall Foundation to talk just a little bit about the fact that they had this kill zone area where so many people were shot to death because all they wanted to do was get to freedom and get to the other side of the wall.
It really goes to the strength of his words and what that speech meant. That the fact that 2 years after he made that speech, that wall came down.
Yep.
And it was a direct result of that challenge to Mikhail Gorbachev, but also Gorbachev's policies that he had implemented in the Soviet Union at the time. The power behind words.
Well,
You think about that.
And then how about the power of maybe unintended consequences? There was, and I just love this story, but there was a German teenager. His name was Matthias Rust. And he, on a kind of a lark, back right in this whole time frame, got a hold of a little airplane, a little single-engine airplane, I believe it was, flew from Helsinki, Finland, evaded the great Soviet air defense systems. I think they never even knew he was flying around.
Right.
And landed the plane in Red Square in Moscow.
I remember.
The headlines around the world were of shock. Here,
Yep.
you can imagine there. And what did Gorbachev do after that happened? He took advantage of that situation, and he cleaned house. All the hardliners who were standing in his way of trying to come to a deal with Reagan, move the world forward toward closer to peace, he swept 150 of them out of office.
Yeah.
And that one little event helped him get to the goal he wanted to, I think, achieve along with Reagan.
Yes.
I think even though they represented capitalism and communism, they were of like minds when it came to world peace.
They were, and as we'll find out in the next segment, they trusted each other.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting when we spoke to our guest in the next segment. But I want to go to a trivia question here because it's a video trivia question and directly relates to our speech.
Okay, let's do it, Johnny.
I'm curious if you're going to be able to get this. In his
All right.
Berlin Wall speech, Ronald Reagan directly referenced a well-known aggressive prediction made by a former Soviet leader in the 50s. Reagan then immediately rebuffed this prediction with evidence of Western progress and prosperity. Which Soviet leader did Reagan quote? We got Stalin, Khrushchev, or Brezhnev?
Well, I don't know the answer, but the first thing that came into my mind was Khrushchev with his line, "We will bury you."
Let's go to the videotape.
Let's go to the videotape.
In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure.
Well, you got it, Ron.
Johnny,
Spot on.
I wish I had some parting gifts or something that I could collect here. Yeah, Nikita Khrushchev did. That was sadly for him, that was probably his most famous speech.
No doubt.
He said, "We will bury you." It didn't exactly work.
Nope.
Because ultimately we saw the Soviet way of life. Interesting. I just wanted to share with you a joke that was one of Ronald Reagan's favorite. He was such a jokester. He had such a great sense of humor, but it portrayed his view of life in the Soviet Union. The joke went like this. A professor is on his way here in the U.S. to the airport to grab a flight to Moscow. And the cabbie says, he's a young guy. He says, "I'm saving for my education." And the professor says, "Really? What do you want to do with your life?" And the cabbie says, "I don't know. I haven't decided yet." Professor takes the flight, lands in the Soviet Union, grabs a cab there at the airport to get to his hotel. Another young cabbie in the same life situation. And the professor says to him, "Well, what do you want to do with your life?" And the cabbie says, "I don't know. They haven't told me yet."
That sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And I'm sure he's the master of timing. I'm sure he loved telling that joke
whatsoever.
and did many times. But he was actually very serious in his determination to bring an end to communist rule. And he was obviously one big cog in the wheel.
Yeah.
But there were many other things that were going on at the time that gradually just led to that and ultimately led to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah. And as we go to the break here, I think it's really a neat thing to think about. But Time magazine back then, later after Reagan's speech, said that his speech, those 4 words, were the 4 most famous words of Ronald Reagan's presidency.
Yes.
That kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, he gave some other very famous speeches, one during a D-Day anniversary at Point du Hoc.
Yep.
And then the sad speech he had to give to rally the country after the space shuttle went down. But yes, I agree. This is the talk that everybody remembers and probably will for more generations to come.
There's no question.
Okay, we'll take a break. Be right back. We welcome you back now to more of the Great American Story. You might notice that John and I have put our headphones on because we're doing something new here on the Great American Story. We're interviewing a guest, John, who's joining us from overseas in Berlin, Germany.
This is a special guest. Yeah, we're talking about that Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah.
And we have a special guest from the... Go ahead.
The Berlin Wall Foundation.
Yep.
It's Professor Dr. Axel Klausmeier, who is joining us from Berlin this morning. Professor, thanks for your time. And maybe to start, especially for our younger audience, maybe those younger than 40, a little background. Why was the wall built, and why were so many people in East Berlin desperate to escape to freedom?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And the wall went up in August 1961, on August 13th, 1961. It was due to the separation, due to the division of Germany after the Second World War. So after the Second World War, Germany was divided into 4 zones, and it was then in 1949 that 2 German states were founded. Until 1952, so just 3 years after the 2 German states were established, the inner German border of approximately 1,400 kilometers was established. So that was a border proper, so to speak, with fences and a wall. But Berlin, being in East Germany, in the center of East Germany, Berlin still being an open city in the West, due to especially American and Western Allied forces, but there was no war until then. And between 1949 and 1961, when the wall finally went up, approximately a sixth of the entire East German population had escaped the so-called workers and farmers paradise. They wanted to live in the West. They wanted to have a free life, free and decisions for individual development, and they did not want to live under communist tyranny. So that was the main reasons for most of them. And of course, there were relatives in the West. So we altogether have approximately 2.7 to 3 million people escaping between 1949 and 1961.
Can you tell us, if you would, a few of the stories? I know you've been collecting them over the years there at the foundation, of those who died while trying to get across to West Berlin.
Yeah. We today know that there were at least 140 people that died at the wall, the majority of them while trying to escape from east to west. And that is the bigger part of them. So more than 100 are part of this group. Most of them actually were just wanted to be, as I described earlier, wanted to be in the West due to better living conditions and a free life in a democratic society, but also due to family members. Some just wanted to live ordinary lives. They wanted to travel, they wanted free elections, they wanted to, perhaps be with their parents, their wives, their children who happen to be on the other side of the border. So that is since the East German border guards had an order to shoot to kill, they opened fire at unarmed and literally helpless people. And so they died.
Professor, we're talking about Ronald Reagan and his famous speech in 1987 at the Brandenburg Gate. Can you give us a little insight as to how impactful that was in that wall coming down, and how West Germans and East Germans at the time viewed that speech?
Well, that was one of the key moments, really, of the late years of division. One must recall that in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the most influential person in the former Soviet Union. He himself, being a communist, and became sort of the head of state. And with his perestroika and glasnost policy, he literally changed the world by introducing new measures of sort of more democratic and critical approaches in the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan, on the other end of the political spectrum, really being sort of a very honest and very successful conservative. I mean, and that is the miracle today, they trusted each other. That is what is so hard to understand. And so Ronald Reagan, when he came to Berlin, it was obvious that the entire East Germany was watching the Western news that day, or during the days Reagan would have been in West Germany, as East Germans did every day. They kind of escaped every evening watching Western news. And so they called in the Western media and the Western information system every night into their living rooms by watching West German television.
Can you imagine?
So in that respect, it was highly influential, and it was a beacon of hope, really, for people in the East.
Well, we do need to wrap up. What will people see when they come now to Berlin and visit what basically you all have created with the Berlin Wall Center?
Well, we have approximately only 1% of the entire wall is left in the city of Berlin. In 1989, there was only one wish to get rid of the wall as quickly as possible. Berliners simply did not want to see it. It was a symbol of hatred, of fear, of death. So the vast majority of the wall disappeared in the year 1990. But today we are looking after the key sites in the center of Berlin, and especially here where I'm having my office in Bernauer Straße, the commemoration site in Bernauer Straße, where we have the only site with the entire width of the former death strip visible, and also one can visit and see it. And we have an exhibition there, and we commemorate the victims here and their stories and their fates. Although it's a very tragic site, the Berlin Wall is also a site of hope, in a way, for many people in very many different countries, because one can see with this wall that dictatorships can be overcome. And so in our case, it is wonderful. It was wonderful 35 years ago, or more than 35 years ago, that it was this communist dictatorship was overcome peacefully, and that's a man-made miracle.
Well,
Great.
we appreciate your time and your insight.
We do.
This is Professor Dr. Alex Klausmeier there of the Berlin Wall Foundation. I'm motivated, John, to get back over there and explore. It's been many, many years.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for your time. You've been so gracious, and your insight is really invaluable to us. We appreciate it. And we say to you, auf Wiedersehen.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon here in Berlin, and also all your visitors and guests. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
What great perspective there
Yeah.
from the professor doctor who was very knowledgeable. We could do a whole nother hour with him.
I could easily listen to an hour with him. Yeah, for sure.
No kidding. All right, so it actually happened, and to this day, I don't know if they know for sure if the announcement was really supposed to be made or not. That prompted the wall to come crumbling down.
Yeah.
But when it was announced, let's see, John, it was Gunther Schabowski.
Yep.
Correct? Mr. Schabowski.
On November 9th, 1989.
He's doing a news conference, and somebody hands him a note. Look, what was happening at that time was that people were starting to figure out a way. Other communist bloc countries were starting to allow their people to have freedom of movement. And so you could leave East Germany, go to, I believe it was Hungary, and come back around into West Germany. So much for your wall, right?
That's right.
And then so the news conference is held. He's handed this note, and he seemed to be a little bit confused that, okay, they were going to open the gates. You could now travel freely between the East and West. Somebody asked the question, so is this now or when? And he said, as far as I know, effective immediately without delay. People weren't waiting. They went right to the wall, and they were dancing on top of it, and they were ready to tear it down.
They were, and the hammers and the chisels
Correct.
and everything started,
Right.
and it started coming down. Now, obviously, it took some time for the entire wall to come down on all those sections, and that would take some months and whatnot.
And it's interesting. I remember on my one trip to Berlin many, many years ago, they had a section of the wall out in front of the hotel where I was staying. We've got the video that I shot when I was in Washington not all that long ago at the Ronald Reagan Center. When you first walk in the building, what's the first thing you see? A section of the Berlin Wall. It was so omnipresent that there are pieces of rock and sections of wall all around the world symbolizing freedom.
That's really his legacy, right? Part of his legacy, a big part of his legacy. I mean, I'll go a step further. The USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier has a museum dedicated to Ronald Reagan on board the ship, and there's a section of that dedicated to the falling of the Berlin Wall, which really that was the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Really, that signified, that symbol of division really ended the Cold War. It put the nail in the coffin on the Cold War.
And to make it even more poignant, if you ever go, and please find a day to go to Simi Valley in the Ronald Reagan Library, see Air Force One, but out there at the gravesite that's been set up, what also stands nearby? A section of the Berlin Wall.
Absolutely,
Talk about one man's legacy.
That's true.
Yeah.
And looking back on his life and his legacy and what he did for freedom around the world, it's really hard to put into words the impact that he had in that regard. So, and Reagan passed away in 2004, and his counterpart Mikhail Gorbachev passed away in 2022. But we can remember certainly those events of the late 80s.
It's a president who really made a mark on this world, and that's today's episode of The Great American Story.